In 2021, Nigeria witnessed cascading human rights violations across board. Rights to life, right to freedom of expression, right to assembly, right to education, just to mention a few. After a year full of records of human rights abuses, where do we go from here? What are the expectations in 2022 as it relates to respect for human rights? Perhaps the Justice Transformation Lab will be our next stop. Hello and welcome to the first edition of Law and Order in 2022. I am Martia Umar. On today's episode, we will be looking at expectations on respect for human rights in Nigeria this year. But before we get into the discussion proper, let's have some Nigerians tell us about the expectations for 2022. Let's take a look.
Human rights is zero. I will score him zero. So he's not trying at all in that aspect. He needs to really get people that will advise him. And our vice president is a son. I don't know why he's not playing that role of talking or teaching him the law.
So many things that need to be changed. Respect for human life, respect for human being, economic situation of the country, security situation of the country. Security agencies need to be funded and well equipped to tackle insecurity.
Welcome back to the show. Thank you for staying with us. And to continue the discussion, or to start the discussion proper on the respect for human rights in Nigeria this year, 2022, we're being joined by a human rights lawyer. He is here to talk about all of the expectations and much more. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so before we continue, I have to introduce him proper. He is Muti Akinsoya Esquire, just like he likes to be called. Yeah. So welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So we can say that 2021 has been the best year when we talk about respect for human rights. In 2021, we saw a lot of rights abuses. We expected a lot of rights that were violated in 2020 to be abated. But what we had at the end of the day was rights abuses not being abated. What was some of the rights abuses that stood out for you or was disturbing to you in 2021?
Yes, thank you very much. Several rights of persons were violated, and it's always been the case in Nigeria. During the lockdown, that was in 2020, there were reports of sexual abuses, rising in sexual abuses. And this, in 2022, we also saw responses to all of that. But I think beyond all of that, the abuses that were still very surprising to me and that were endemic in 2021 were abuses by police officers and detaining illegally citizens who ought not to be detained illegally. You also had instances of citizens who are also detained in detention facilities without trials. And it is not just one, two, or three. They're in their hundreds across detention facilities all across the country. So I think for me, I thought 2021 will be a year that will have said bye-bye to all of those illegal detentions and violation of the rights of citizens. But unfortunately, 2021 was a year that we still had all of this across the country. In spite of the End SARS campaign, there was still a lot of abuses. Yeah.
In the End SARS campaign, there was something we call like a remembrance day of the people that lost their lives in the massacre, and some people who were brutalized as a result of the End SARS, not just in Lagos, but other parts of the country as well. And then it happens that we saw another kind of rights abuses by security agencies, and then we saw the white paper, the panel's report, still in 2021. What can you say about all of this?
I think I must commend Lagos State when it comes to releasing the white paper for the End SARS panel in Lagos. But I think it was only Lagos that drew or captured our attention in 2021. And it's not just Lagos alone that should be at the forefront. We should also see that also happening in all parts of the country.
In 2022?
In 2022. But I must say we have some very important laws that if those laws are activated, we will not have to start setting up panels anywhere in the country. I'll give an example. We have the Anti-Torture Act of 2017 that is to be implemented by the Attorney General of the Federation. And that law is supposed to bring to book anybody, particularly officers of law enforcement agents, who perpetrate any form of violence or torture against citizens. But since the passage of that law in 2017, nobody has been brought to book for torture against citizens or for violation of rights of citizens. And that particular law is focused at the law enforcement agents. Going into the new year, 2022, I think I expect the Attorney General to really take the challenge to ensure that this law is properly enforced. If that law is enforced, I can tell you that issues of police brutality, violations of the rights of citizens will be drastically reduced.
So where does the NSAS stand, seeking redress for the victims of NSAS stands right now?
Yes, I think going forward, we will always have cases of violation. We can only have a drastic reduction in what we've had over the years. But I think going forward, we must also strengthen the judiciary, strengthen our courts. Because if the courts are functioning very well, if the courts are places where citizens can go and ensure that their rights that they can ventilate their grievances and get justice, then we won't be talking about setting up any panel, because the laws are there to ensure that citizens can make complaints in the law court and get justice. It is because in the past, citizens were not getting justice from the courtrooms. That is why the government had to set up all of those panels. So if police officers are found violating the rights of citizens, torturing citizens, and citizens are aware or they know for sure that if they go to the courtroom, their matters will be accelerated, will be heard speedily, and they will get justice, and that those perpetrators are brought to book, it will instill in all of us the confidence that we will get justice. And for those who are the perpetrators too, they will know that they won't go scot-free. So they will desist from perpetrating all those acts of torture or violation of the rights of citizens, particularly law enforcement agents. And that will then ensure that we will not have a reoccurrence of the NSAS. Yes.
So what are those other rights you want to talk about, the ones that were disturbing to you last year in 2021?
Okay, you know very well that in 2015, the Administration of Criminal Justice Act was passed. And as we speak now, almost all states of the Federation have domesticated that law, with very few states remaining. And the efforts to implement that law is still ongoing everywhere. That law made a very great change, which hitherto was a very big problem in Nigeria, and that's the issue of remand. Before 2015, the police could arrest anybody and keep that person in remand indefinitely. And that's why you had instances where people were kept in detention for years without being tried. But now the law as it is now mandates any law enforcement agents who wants to detain any citizen for whatever offense should go to the magistrate within the jurisdiction and then get an order for 14 days. And it's renewal for another 14 days, and then another 14 days in the FCT. In some other states, it's only renewable once. So what that means is that even if the police is going to conduct investigation, the police would have a maximum of 28 days, no matter how complicated the case is. And if they are unable to charge the individual to court, then they would have to release the individual on bail or release the individual unconditionally. But in 2021, we saw that the police were still detaining people for more than the days provided under the law. And that was why some of our correctional centers were still congested. In the FCT, for instance, we had to do a lot of work in getting people who were remanded in prison like 2 years ago, and some of them only on ex parte, just to keep them for 14 days, and they were forgotten there. And that's why it's important that going into the new year, 2022, that the Administration of Criminal Justice Act or law in other states should be properly implemented. That 14 days period should be respected by the police. And the judiciary, the magistrates now, must also follow up. When they give orders for remand for 14 days, they must follow up and ensure that after 14 days, that a return date is given so that those persons who are remanded are brought back to court. And then the court is also up to date as to what the circumstance of investigation is. And if the police is unable to charge them, then they should be released. Because keeping them indefinitely is a violation of their rights. And it's not going to stop people from committing crime. In fact, it's going to destroy the entire justice system.
Earlier you mentioned strengthening of the judicial system in Nigeria. And isn't that supposed to be the responsibility of all levels of government? Or do individuals have a role to play in all of this?
Yes, individuals have roles to play, but of course the major organs of government are the major stakeholders when it comes to the judiciary. But you see, the problem of the judiciary in Nigeria is multifaceted. From appointment of judges or people who sit on the bench to accountability, autonomy, and even to hearing of cases speedily. All of these are challenges. And for me, going into 2022, I want to see a judiciary that would be manned by people who are competent. A situation where we would appoint judges, appoint magistrates because they are competent, not because they're brothers or sisters to very powerful people in the country. It must be merit-based. And that is the only time that we'll be able to beat our chest and say, these people are people of integrity, and they are people who will ensure that they deliver justice. And that will also go to even the implementation of the law. Because, for instance, judges should not be lazy people. Judges should be people who are very hardworking. And it's only when you have people of integrity seated on the bench that they would ensure that all of these laws are implemented. For instance, you have the day-to-day hearing provided under the ACJA or the ACJL, particularly for
of Criminal Justice
Act. Yes, that matters should be heard as practicable on a day-to-day basis. You understand? But we've not seen that really functioning very well.
And why is that?
Yes, there are a lot of factors, you understand. But for me, I think one factor that we cannot close our eyes to is also that we also have judges or magistrates who are also not ready for the job. You know, some of them, of course, will complain that they have too many cases to handle, so they cannot do all of that. But if you're taking up the role of a judge, you must know that it comes with these challenges. So we must have judges who are selfless, who are ready to navigate the system the way it is and ensure that they help to declog their courts from all of these cases.
All right. 2022 was plagued with a lot of sexual abuses. We have bullying in schools, which have led to deaths of students in secondary school, primary school, or even in the tertiary institutions. That's a big right abuses that we've not been able to wrap our heads around. 2022 was full of stories like that, and I'm sure you must have handled some in 2021. I mean 2021. I keep saying 2022 probably because we're in the new year already. But you know, there are some that you've handled. What are some of these abuses that stood out for you, like bullying and sexual abuses?
Yes, I was opportune to handle some cases of sexual abuses, particularly cases of bullying, not any that I handled personally, but of course it was all over the news that there were issues of bullying, particularly in secondary schools across the country. For me, I think what we saw in 2021 was not really a perfect demonstration of what is happening. What is happening is really more endemic than what we saw. But what that means is that we must now take up the challenge, particularly institutions that are responsible for overseeing the activities of schools must now take it more seriously. And they must ensure that the rights of children, because most of these people in these schools are children, are properly protected. And that brings us to the Child's Rights Act of 2003 that we're still struggling to ensure is domesticated across all of the states in Nigeria. That law is comprehensive enough to protect any child anywhere. And what the regulatory bodies over schools should now start looking out for are schools that will not protect the right of these children. And I think we need to get 1, 2, 3 and really use them as examples so that every other school will also sit up and then take the issue of children very, very seriously. There are laws already in place to protect these children. So if any school is unable to ensure that those children are protected, then the school itself is liable to be prosecuted. And I really see, that's what I look forward to in the new year, that regulatory bodies, the Ministry of Education or boards in various states that are responsible must now take this very seriously and then ensure that schools are aware of the Child's Rights Act and that they comply with all of the provisions therein for the protection of the rights of children.
One case very particular about the Child Rights Act and the implementation of some of those laws is the fact that the case of Karen Akbaha happened here in Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory. The Child Rights Act, it has been domesticated here in the FCT, and the VAP Act, which oversees some of these rights abuses as relates to sexual violence, is also domesticated here. But as we speak, the case of Karen has been lingering for more than 6 months now. The perpetrators are yet to be brought to book. What would you say about that?
I think it still goes to the issue of not having very strong institutions in Nigeria. It still goes to the issue of not having very strong regulatory bodies over schools in Nigeria. And of course also the police and other agencies of government. And I think that's the reason why, as we speak now, we still do not have a clear-cut answer to what transpired in respect of that young girl that died. In any country in the world where you have strong institutions that are working, where you have strong regulatory bodies, I do not think anybody will be in the dark as to what exactly transpired. And if it's an issue of sexual abuse, I think it's not something that is difficult. And the police particularly should be able to speak in clear terms on what exactly happened. The medical bodies that were also involved should also be able to speak in clear terms. In this particular case, of course, the police said they had an autopsy report that showed that it was not, that she was not sexually abused, that she died of too much sugar in her blood or something to that effect.
No, the autopsy report did disclose that a condom was left in her genital, which triggered the blood sugar because Karen was diabetic. So it led to sepsis.
Okay, exactly. So whatever it is, the medical doctors must have found something. And whatever they found, they must then work in collaboration with the police to ensure that what was found is really brought out to the public and properly investigated. And the people who are the perpetrators will, of course, be people around the young girl, either people around her in school or people around her at home. But of course, from what the parents said, they said all through the period that she was in school. And going into the new year, I think we should also be careful of being defensive. And that's for schools. We should see ourselves as collaborators in ensuring that perpetrators are brought to book. And of course, the complaint by the parents and by even some CSOs and non-governmental organizations against the school was that the school was being defensive and the school was not collaborating with them to ensure that the perpetrators are brought to book. That's an issue of fact that I'm not here to say whether it was right or wrong.
Exactly.
Yes, but what's important is that going into the new year, we must see ourselves as collaborators, and we must see ourselves as working together to ensure that perpetrators of this kind of crimes are brought to book.
Now, the bullying and the sexual assault, at what point do we say bullying has occurred in schools? Because it seems a lot of people cannot differentiate between discipline and bullying in schools these days. And all those are right abuses and happens to children most times.
Yes, this is also an issue of law. And we'll still look at the Child's Rights Act. Yes, that's the law that protects children, and all of these people we talk about in schools are children. And that's why it's important that teachers, proprietors, owners of schools are also well acquainted with the law. They should know what the law has provided for. If it comes to disciplining children, it should be done within the ambits of the law. Proprietors, owners of schools and teachers should not go beyond the bounds. But like the case that happened in Lagos, it was not even particularly a case between maybe the teachers and the students. I think that was more of an issue within the students themselves. Students bullying students, children bullying children. But again, you can't also take away the fact that the owners of schools can also be culpable, because it's only when they allow that to thrive within their schools that such will happen. And what that also means is that they do not discharge their responsibility of ensuring that they oversee the activities of those children and also protect those children when they need to be protected. So going into the new year, schools must understand that they have an obligation under the law, under the Child's Rights Act, and they must always look out for issues like this and ensure that they are nipped at the early stage, so that it does not become issues of bullying that will even result to deaths or injury against students.
So in 2021, there were a lot of acts that were supposed to be assented to, and they were not assented to. And then the Executive Secretary of the Human Rights Commission did talk about the president signing a national human rights policy that's added to a lot of acts we already have and which we're clamoring for implementation till date. What difference does it make if we have all of these rights assented to? What difference did it make to respect for human rights in 2022?
Yes, if we have more laws, it is good for the system. Yes, but I think what we must focus on is on implementing the already existing laws. It's very important that we focus on implementing the laws that have been passed over the years. And I'm sure I've mentioned some of them. One that I've not mentioned is the Correctional Services Act. Very, very important. But one bill that also comes to mind recently is the equality bill.
Gender equality
bill. And for me, I think we must really face the reality and all support that bill. Our culture and our religious beliefs are not hindrances to that bill, in my humble opinion. And I think we must really understand our cultures better, and we must understand our religion better. If we do that, we will find that there are no hindrances in our religion. And that's why if you look at all parts of the country, you had Queen Amina of Zaria, who played a prominent role. You have the daughter of Usman bin Fodi, Nana Asma, who also played a very vital role. She was a woman, but she is still a point of reference in northern Nigeria. In the southern part of the country, you also have similar people who also played very vital roles. For instance, I'll give an example, and that's been an ongoing debate on why women cannot even be caddies in the northern part of Nigeria. And of course, there are a lot of even scholars that have said women can also be caddies in Sharia courts. That bill should be passed into law.
Okay. Now, Nigeria is far from being saying that we're free. It's far from being saying that human rights are being respected in Nigeria. That means that there's a lot of work to do. We need to improve the justice system in the country. So how can we do some of this? Now, I'm going to split it now. The government has a role to play at all levels, and then individuals have their rights as well. The judiciary have a right to play. So in 2022, because we want rights to be respected, we want people to know about their rights, to seek redress, and to know their limits, because they say when your right starts, another person, when your right ends, another person's right begins, right? So how can we do all of this in 2022?
I think we must have a government that will walk the talk. That's one. We must also have citizens who are also ready to support the system. Citizens who are ready to speak up and ensure that the right things are done. Yes, we have laws, but again, if citizens are weak, if citizens refuse to press for their rights, if citizens refuse to talk when they should talk, nobody will know that their rights are being violated. So citizens must know these laws, and they must do their best to press for the implementation of these laws. Institutions of government, non-governmental organizations must also do their best to ensure that the roles that are assigned to them by law, because most of these laws that we have mentioned also understands that these institutions have critical roles to play. So everybody, we must all play our roles and not trade blames, not blame ourselves. If we all play our roles, I can tell you that 2022 would be a year that when we come to review it, we will find that yes, there is a huge improvement when it comes to respect for human rights.
All right. I wish we could continue this conversation, but time is not just our friend. Just like always, time is not just our friend. But thank you so much, Mutia Kusoya, Esquire, for being on the program today. And of course, he is a human rights lawyer, and he has been doing a lot of things around human rights, respect for human rights in Nigeria. But though Nigeria, like other countries, are facing a myriad of human rights challenges, the country can strive towards a nation that acknowledges the rights of all human beings with strong and effective national protection system. If government at all levels and relevant stakeholders and the citizens do the right things at the right time, this 2022, we might just, like he said, when we come for review, we might just be saying a lot of things good about respect to human rights. But hope you will join us on the journey for this year, as the show will always teach you about your rights, educate you about your rights and responsibility, as ignorance, they say, is not an excuse in a court of law. Thank you for being part of the program. Thank you for watching Law and Order today. If you have questions or comments about the program, please leave a message on our social media handles. I am Martia Umar. See you next time.